34 years. That's how long Transnistria has been a frozen conflict sitting on Europe's doorstep. A breakaway region that Russia controls, Moldova wants back, and nobody, not the EU, not NATO, not even the UN, has managed to untangle. But last week, Putin just made a move that rewrites the entire game. He issued a decree fast-tracking Russian citizenship for Transnistrian residents. No language tests. No 5-year residency requirement, just citizenship handed out like weapons. And here's the part that matters. This is exactly the same tactic he used before invading Ukraine. We've seen this movie before. The question is, what happens when you play it a third time? So here's what we're going to figure out together. First, why is a region most people have never heard of suddenly critical to understanding Russia's next move? Second, how did Moldova's president, Maia Sandu, turn what looked like a losing position into economic leverage so powerful that Putin had to escalate? And third, what does this citizenship decree actually mean for the 475,000 people trapped between two worlds? We'll get to all three. But to make sense of any of it, you need to understand one specific thing about how Russia uses frozen conflicts. They're not mistakes, they're not accidents, they're tools. And Putin just picked his up again. Let's start with the basics. Transnistria exists because of a decision made in 1992, right after the Soviet Union collapsed. Moldova declared independence and made Moldovan the official language. The left bank of the Dniester River, a strip of land about 1,600 square miles, said no. The population there was Russian-speaking. The elites there had power under Soviet rule. They weren't about to surrender either. A short civil war erupted. The Russian 14th Army, stationed there since Soviet times, sided with the separatists. Moldova lost. A ceasefire was signed in July 1992, and then nothing happened. 34 years of nothing. But here's where it gets interesting. For most of those 34 years, the Transnistria issue was allowed to just exist. Moldovan government swung between pro-Russian and oligarch-controlled, and nobody had the political will to force a resolution. That changed the moment Maia Sandu took office in 2020. She wasn't pro-Russian, she was unequivocally pro-Western, anti-corruption, and determined to pull Moldova into the EU. In March 2022, Moldova applied for EU membership. By August 2022, it had candidate status. A referendum on EU membership was held in 2024. It passed barely, with 50.17% voting yes. And that's when the real pressure started. Here's the problem. To join the EU, Moldova has to meet the Copenhagen criteria. It has to prove stable democracy, a functioning market economy, and the capacity to enforce EU law across its entire territory. Every single inch. A mine. And that's impossible when a strategically important chunk of your country is de facto under Russian control. The EU has signaled that territorial disputes don't automatically disqualify you. Cyprus joined with an ongoing dispute, after all. But the rules have tightened since then. For Sandu, resolving Transnistria became a top priority, but not militarily, economically. In January 2024, Sandu's government imposed taxes on imports and exports to Transnistria. In January 2025, Ukraine began strict border controls along the 280-mile frontier, inspections on everything, mobile units beyond fixed checkpoints. The message was clear. Informal trade routes were closing. Russian support that had moved through gray zones and friendly businesses suddenly became visible and easy to intercept. Transnistria's economy contracted by 18% in 2025, industrial production dropped 27.3%, foreign trade fell 28.5%, inflation hit 14.7%. The region went from a manageable problem to a financial crisis, and that's when Putin reacted. On May 13th, the Russian State Duma passed a law giving him authority to deploy troops abroad to protect Russian citizens from foreign prosecution. Moscow doesn't recognize Kiev's government. It's already signaling it might not recognize Sandu's either. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova made the threat explicit. Any aggression against our fellow citizens living in Transnistria will receive an immediate and adequate response. 2 days later, Putin signed the Citizenship Decree. Fast-track applications, no language requirements, no residency waiting period, just paperwork and a passport. Now, Sandu's response was immediate and sharp. She claims Putin is attempting a hidden mobilization, recruiting locals as Russian citizens so they can be conscripted into the war in Ukraine. She also says it's political pressure, an attempt to destabilize Moldova as she pushes toward EU integration. And she's confident it won't work because, she insists, most Transnistrians want Moldovan citizenship and EU membership, not Russian documents. In interviews with RFI and DW, she said people are actively choosing Moldovan passports because they feel safer. They want to be EU citizens, not Russian citizens. But the numbers tell a more complicated story. Yes, applications for Moldovan passports from Transnistria have increased, more than 2,000 in 2025 alone, a 50% jump from 2024. But that's after a significant drop-off. Between 2022 and 2023, the government issued 38,040 passports. The vast majority, over 90% of current total, were issued before the Ukraine war even started. By the end of 2020, 330,538 Transnistrians already held Moldovan citizenship. So the surge Sandu points to as evidence of EU enthusiasm is real, but it's also smaller than the earlier wave that happened for different reasons entirely. There's also an element of irony here that deserves attention. Romania has been offering expedited citizenship to Moldovans for years, based on shared history and ancestry, no language tests. Exemptions from residency requirements. By 2024, more than a third of Moldova's population, hundreds of thousands of people had obtained Romanian passports this way, including Sandu herself. So when Putin offers Transnistrians fast-tracked Russian citizenship, he's not inventing a new tool. He's copying something the EU has been doing through Romania for decades. The difference isn't the mechanism, it's the intent. But here's what makes this move genuinely dangerous. Putin isn't just handing out passports. He's creating legal justification for military intervention. The May 13th law gives him authority to deploy forces to protect Russian citizens. If thousands of Transnistrians suddenly hold Russian citizenship, and if any of them face legal action by Moldova or Ukraine, Putin now has a legal framework in his own courts to send troops. It's the same playbook he used in Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014. Create Russian citizens, wait for a pretext, deploy forces to protect them, call it a peacekeeping operation. Sandu sees this clearly. She's not waiting for Putin to make the next move. She's already announced that Moldova will pursue reintegration of Transnistria through demilitarization, de-oligarchization, and democratization. She's calling for an international mechanism under EU oversight. She's also been explicit that if peaceful reintegration doesn't work, Moldova's best option might be unification with Romania. And she said she would personally vote for that outcome. Unification would solve the EU problem instantly. Moldova would join the EU as part of Romania, territorial dispute resolved. But that's a last resort. Right now, Sandu's strategy is to make Transnistria so economically isolated that Russian support becomes unsustainable. The Kobazna ammunition depot, the largest in Eastern Europe, sitting just over a mile from the Ukrainian border, is the key leverage point. It holds roughly 22,000 tons of military equipment, some of it 75 years old. An explosion there would be equivalent to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, according to Moldova's Academy of Sciences. Russia can't move those weapons without Ukraine and Moldova noticing. It can't supply the region without those weapons becoming visible. And it can't maintain 1,500 troops in Transnistria indefinitely while the region's economy collapses. Putin's citizenship decree is a gamble. Either it triggers enough mobilization to shore up Russian control, or it's a bluff meant to intimidate Sandu into backing down. But Sandu isn't backing down. She's doubling down. She's betting that economic pressure will break Transnistria's dependency on Russia faster than Putin can replace it. She's betting that EU membership is more attractive to ordinary Transnistrians than Russian conscription. She's betting that the international community will back her over Putin. The stakes here are enormous. If Sandu succeeds, she rewrites the rules for how frozen conflicts can be resolved. She proves that economic leverage and EU integration can overcome military occupation. She opens a path for Moldova to join the EU and potentially NATO. And she demonstrates that Russia's old playbook, fast-track citizenship, legal justification for intervention, military pressure doesn't work anymore when the target is determined and has Western backing. If Putin succeeds, he stabilizes his grip on Transnistria, creates a legal framework for military intervention, and sends a message to every other post-Soviet state considering EU integration. There's a price for leaving Russia's sphere. He also gains another staging ground for potential pressure on NATO's eastern flank. The war in Ukraine is already draining resources. A second frozen conflict that requires active management is manageable. A second frozen conflict that becomes hot is not. For now, the situation is escalating rapidly. Sandu is moving forward with EU integration plans. Putin is consolidating control over Transnistria through citizenship and military law changes. Ukraine and Moldova are tightening the economic noose. And 475,000 people in Transnistria are caught in the middle, watching their region's economy collapse while two superpowers play chess with their future. The question isn't whether something will happen next. It's whether it happens through economic pressure, diplomatic negotiation, or military escalation. And that answer depends entirely on whether Sandu's gamble pays off before Putin runs out of patience.